Imagine making a deal for $1 million only to get completely ghosted. In 1984, that's exactly what happened. A handshake was supposed to make this wrestling family rich, but instead of being a sale, it was an execution. The checks stopped coming, the phone calls were ignored, and a legendary wrestling dad had to choose between $1 million or his own son's careers. This is the insane story of how Vince McMahon didn't just buy Stampede Wrestling, he tore it apart, broke a promise, and created the blueprint for his entire empire. Before the WWE took over the world, wrestling was split into a ton of different territories. It was a turf war, and every territory had its own king. And in Canada, one kingdom was tougher than anywhere else: Stampede Wrestling. This place was run by this guy, Stu Hart, for 40 years. And Stu wasn't just some promoter, he was a legend. And his style of wrestling was the complete opposite of cartoons. Stampede felt real. It was gritty. It was what insiders called stiff. The punches were real, the holds were real, and the pain was 100% real. Fans didn't show up for acting. They came to see what looked like a real fight. The show was a Canadian institution, on TV forever, and people in dozens of countries watched this super intense style. And get this, in his basement, he had a place that became a wrestling legend: the Dungeon. And this wasn't some fancy gym. It was a dark, scary basement with basically nothing but a thin mat over concrete. This is where Stu Hart, a legit grappling expert, personally turned regular guys into wrestling superstars. He would literally stretch them and twist them past their limits, burning a deep respect for the business into them. And the people who survived? The Dungeon is an insane list of future legends. We're talking guys like superstar Billy Graham, game changers like Chris Jericho, Lance Storm, and Brian Pillman, all trained on those mats. And of course, Stu's own sons, the master technician Bret and the high-flying genius Owen. It wasn't a gym, it was a superstar factory for creating the backbone of North American wrestling. Stampede was a literal family business. Stu ran it, his wife Helen did the books, and his sons were the stars. It was its own little world built on old-school rules. A handshake was a contract, your word was everything, and you protected your territory no matter what. There was even a gentleman's agreement between all the wrestling bosses not to invade each other's turf. For decades, this system actually worked. But in the 80s, everything started to change. In 1982, this guy, Vince McMahon Jr., bought the WWF from his dad. But unlike his father, who played by the old rules, Vince had a crazy vision. He didn't want just one territory. He wanted to own the entire world of wrestling. The gentleman's agreement was about to be obliterated. For Stu Hart, this threat came at the worst possible time. By 1984, he was 69 years old and completely worn out. The business was a grind. Then, something crazy happened when a wrestler attacked another wrestler's son at ringside. The backlash was huge. Stampede's famous commentator quit on the air, and the company started losing a ton of money. Stu's fortress was starting to crumble, and a much younger, hungrier lion was about to attack. As Vince McMahon's WWF started its takeover, the strategy was simple and completely brutal. Go into a town, spend crazy amounts of money, and just steal their TV show. One by one, the old wrestling kingdom started to fall, and the ultimate prize was Stampede Wrestling. It had two things Vince wanted more than anything: a huge TV audience and a roster of the best wrestlers on the planet. Vince was laser-focused on the incredible Bret the Hitman Hart and the insane British Bulldogs, Dynamite Kid and Davey Boy Smith. Their brother-in-law, Jim the Anvil Neidhart, was part of the package too. These guys were the future, and Vince would do anything to get them. For Stu Hart, the pressure was unbelievable. He was losing money and could see what was coming. When Vince McMahon made him an offer in the summer of 1984, it probably felt like his only way out. On August 24th, 1984, they shook hands on a deal. Some people say it was for $1 million. Others say $750,000. Either way, it was a ton of money. The plan was for Stu to get paid in chunks over the next 10 years. In return, Vince got literally everything. He got the TV show, the arenas, and the most important prize. Bret Hart, Dynamite Kid, and Davey Boy Smith were all headed to the WWF. And at first, Stu was so happy. For an old-school guy like Stu, the deal was perfect. He was getting a huge retirement fund, and his best wrestlers were getting guaranteed jobs in the biggest company in the world. It was a win-win. It was a handshake deal, just like the good old days. But this wasn't the good old days. This was Vince McMahon's world. For the first year, everything seemed fine. The WWF took over the TV show, and the wrestlers went east. But when it was time for the second payment to arrive, there was literally nothing. The money just stopped. Stu started calling the WWF offices, and they just ignored his calls. That $1 million handshake meant nothing. And what Vince did next is absolutely insane. The Harts say Vince just stopped paying. That's it. No more money. But the other side of the story is that the deal only worked if the Harts got out of wrestling completely. And one of Stu's other sons, Bruce, started running small shows in the area. So Vince supposedly used that as an excuse to cancel the entire deal. He called the Harts and allegedly said, "The deal's off. You can have your company back." To the Hart family, this was a scam. Vince already had everything he wanted. He got rid of his competition, took their TV spot, and stole the wrestlers who would become the Hart Foundation and the British Bulldogs, two of the best tag teams ever. He took the talent, took the TV, and when it was time to pay up, he just ghosted them. Bret didn't even find out for years that his dad got ripped off. Finding out his family was stiffed was a huge shock. That handshake wasn't a deal, it was an execution. The fallout was immediate. When the WWF took over the Saturday TV slot, the fans in Calgary were so angry. They had lost their favorite show, and they hated the replacement. And this is the craziest part. Vince McMahon's big plan was a total flop at first. Even with Hulk Hogan, nobody came to the WWF shows in Calgary. They held a show in a giant arena, and only 700 people showed up. 700! They killed the local company, but they couldn't even get its fans to watch their product. So when Vince told the Harts they could have their company back, it was a totally empty offer. The company was broken. His 4 biggest stars were now locked into WWF contracts and becoming huge stars. The TV slot was gone. The fans' trust was gone. The reality was, if you weren't the WWF, you were fighting for survival. Still, the Harts tried to bring it back. With Bruce Hart in charge, they relaunched Stampede Wrestling in late 1985. They brought in a whole new group of wrestlers who would become legends themselves, like a young Brian Pillman and Chris Benoit. For a few years, they actually did pretty well, and Owen Hart became a massive star. But it was an impossible fight. The entire territory system was dying. By December 1989, fighting within the family and the unstoppable power of the WWF were too much. Stampede Wrestling shut down. Bruce and Ross Hart tried to restart it again in 1999. But just a month after their first big show, the family was hit with the tragic death of Owen Hart. The promotion struggled for a few more years, but it never recovered from the heartbreak and closed for good in 2008. So, the legacy of this deal is completely insane. For Bret Hart, this was the move that made him a global superstar. But his entire career was built on his dad getting completely destroyed financially. Stu believed a handshake meant everything. He trusted a guy from a new world where a handshake meant nothing. And this is the most heartbreaking part of the entire story. Bret's parents never sued Vince. And the reason why will blow your mind. They were scared Vince would fire their sons. They gave up $1 million to protect their kids' careers. Can you even imagine that? The guy famous for putting wrestlers in painful submission holds was in a hold he could never escape. He literally couldn't fight for his money without destroying his son's future. So, this entire story is a war between two worlds. You had Stu Hart's old school world of tradition, grit, and handshake deals. And then you had Vince McMahon's new world of total global domination, no matter who got crushed. And when those two worlds collided in 1984, only one was left standing. Vince McMahon got his TV time and his future champions. He got rid of a competitor and took over Western Canada. Stu Hart was left with a broken promise and the awful truth that the rules he lived by didn't matter anymore. He made the impossible choice to stay quiet and lose his money just to save his son's career. That tells you everything about the kind of man he was. The Hart legacy lived on, but it was forever tangled up with the McMahon empire in a crazy dance of success, betrayal, and tragedy. The deal that destroyed Stampede Wrestling was the moment the old world of wrestling was executed and the new one took its place. So, I have to know, what do you think? Was Vince a genius businessman for doing whatever it took to build the WWE? Or was this a cold, calculated betrayal that took advantage of an old man's trust? Let me know what you think in the comments down below. And if you think this story is as crazy as I do, smash that like button and subscribe right now so you don't miss our next deep dive into wrestling history.